excited. They were talking, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it was my.
Did it get better? I like it. I couldn't do it. I said, put your gloves on.
Yep.
That's fine.
Yeah. So we do it. Look, we have. Local, I'm like, fun.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Menomonie School Board to order. The meeting has been properly noticed. Janet, would you take the roll call, please?
Chris Freeman,
Yes.
Mark Hillman,
Here.
Bonnie Hussey,
Here.
Clint Moses, Carl Palmer,
Here.
Amy Riddle Swanson, Charlie Schneider,
Here.
Angie Skilling,
Here.
David Steyer.
Here. We have a quorum to conduct business. We'll move on to item 1C, agenda order approval and revision. Does anybody have anything for tonight? One thing I would like to add is that we have nothing on the agenda tonight considering masks, which is the first time, I think, in 6 meetings. But there is on the horizon the potential for the FDA to approve the vaccines for younger children. And so with that and some other circumstances, I would anticipate either the first or second meeting in November that we will have something back on the agenda again. So, we have nothing for item 1D, recommendations and commendations. Communications, we have received none via email. We do have a few here to go through tonight. The comments of the people of the school districts of the Menomonie area are encouraged and appreciated by the board and the administrators. Education is a partnership with the schools, parents, and taxpayers, all being important participants. This is a time to air concerns and express your opinions on issues. There should be no negative personal attacks against any individuals, including staff, board members, or administrators. Each person, when I call your name, come forward. When we start, you'll have 3 minutes to talk, and we'll be strict with the time. Please state your name and the municipality that you're from. And I'll introduce the first speaker and also who's on deck. Sorry.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Are we able to question a speaker ever?
Typically, we don't. There are some things in policy that allows for clarifying questions, but the historical stance of the board has been that we simply take comments from the public. Joe, anything on that?
Yeah, Angie, due to the nature of the open meetings law, it's not recommended that the board engage in any discussion during the public comments. However, typically if there is an issue where the board, we're kind of instant feedback here, Brian. Typically if there's an issue the board would like someone to get back on, the board would direct me to do that.
Okay.
It does feel awkward, but it's just to make sure we're in compliance with the laws.
Okay.
Okay, our first speaker tonight is Lucy Redenborg. On deck, Fran Semesky. And I'll start the timer once you start speaking.
I understand this isn't on the agenda, but so we're going to talk about it. I'm just going to talk about the Menomonie.
Can you talk closer to the mic so I can hear it?
Oh, no.
There you go.
Now that we're well into year 2 of 15 days to slow the spread, it's time to face a few realities. The first is that COVID is not going to go away. Anyone who thought draconian lockdowns and unconstitutional government mandates would rid us of COVID was living in fantasy land. It's time to do what we should have done from the start, which is learn to live with it. The good news is that COVID is not nearly as dangerous as we were initially led to believe. It poses no serious threat to most of the non-elderly population. And for healthy children, the risk of death from COVID is statistically zero. Yet some people persist in talking about it as if it were Ebola or cholera or tuberculosis. They insist to continue the ridiculous practice of forcing healthy children to wear masks to school, in spite of the fact there is no scientific evidence whatsoever that masking children protects either them or anyone else, and in spite of abundant evidence that masking children is harmful. Forcing children to wear muzzles as if they were rabid animals is dehumanizing. It teaches them to see the world as a frightening, dangerous place, to fear and mistrust other people, to suspect that everyone they encounter is a potential killer just waiting to infect them with a deadly disease. The psychological damage being done to children with this relentless fear mongering is unconscionable. Future generations will probably laugh themselves silly over the way the United States has mishandled COVID and the way millions of people gave into irrational fear over a cold virus that poses no serious threat to most of the population and no threat at all to healthy children, and allowed themselves to be locked down, isolated, and have their civil rights trampled upon. There is no chance that we will avoid becoming a laughingstock, but that should not prevent us from doing whatever we can to make life less miserable for our children. We can begin by getting rid of mask mandates once and for all and letting parents decide what's best for their kids. The fact that even the CDC's own studies found no benefit from putting masks on children will not change the minds of adults who have bought into COVID hysteria. But that's no reason to force everyone else to abide by their preferences. So for the love of all that's holy, put an end to this madness now.
Thank you, Lucy. Next, Franz Meston. On deck, Josie Kelly.
You can figure it out if you like. Sure.
Okay, I'm,
If you feel more comfortable, Fran, you can sit down.
okay, honest integrity. What is our function as a community and in school? A few years ago, the school adopted some new laws pertaining to the LGBTQ community. I want to address the board pertaining to these new laws. A couple years ago, I brought my grandson to the school for orientation. I noticed all teachers were wearing LGBTQ pins and displaying the gay rights flag in most of the rooms. I also had conversations with staff and faculty about the subject and was very disturbed as to how the school set forth in motion laws and bylaws to protect the LGBTQ kids. I also asked about the straight students, what was in place for them if they get upset. Is there a safe place for them? I was told, of course, there is. I'm not a college graduate, nor am I the most educated person, but I knew I was being lied to. Fast forward to this date. Many male students have come across the same problem and have expressed to me that the staff and faculty refuse to do anything about this, meaning this girls going into the boys' bathroom, when they already have 2 bathrooms for their own use. This is the LGBTQ kids. For their own use, and the male student telling the female students to get out. When the male students approach the faculty and try to talk to them about this, they say, yeah, we'll talk to that female student. Yet it continues. Now we have dignity, decency, and self-worth involved. Many male students hate to go to the bathroom now because anyone can just walk in, especially a female. There goes their privacy and dignity. Plus you enter into this, the fear factor. The male knows, the males know that these females will continue to do this over and over again because they will not be reprimanded. Now the school has created a new bully zone because the boys know that they can't trust the teachers nor the faculty from these bullies. Is this the way you want the school to run? It's not business as usual as long as this is going on. It will only create more problems. Till we address this issue, girls don't belong in boys' bathrooms any more than boys don't belong in girls' bathrooms. You must think about how detrimental this is for the students. Several male students have expressed to me that they got into trouble because they told the female students get out. Your policy should be educated, not get involved in the LGBTQ. Most students at this age are well on their way to solving their own problems. Sincerely, friends. I'll set that there.
Okay, thank you, Fran. Josie Tillman. On deck, Andrew Schlu.
I am Joseph Hillman, and I live in Nam. School board members and Dr. Zajdowski, thank you for allowing me to speak. Wisconsin State Statute 118.13, paragraph 1. I'm quoting, but I have condensed it for time. No person may be denied admission to any public school or be denied participation in or be discriminated against because of the person's sexual orientation. The SDMA has written up Rule 411.2 in the Gender Support Plan for students to be in compliance with the state statute. I will quote parts of this plan that I have particular concern about. Every student has the right to be addressed, I'm quoting, every student has the right to be addressed by a name that corresponds to their gender identification. This concept, which is a lie, should be applied to their preferred pronoun usage, regardless of an official name change. I'm quoting again, additional area support may include, but are not limited to, substitute teachers, school photos, after-school programming, lunch lines, attendance, grade books, home communication, outside district personnel, yearbook, student ID, official calls, and announcements. What kind of lie are we supporting? Who's intimidating us? Who will help this student have the courage to step back into the truth on their way forward? Pretending you are a different gender than you were born is rebellion against your creator who made you male or female. Quoting again, the district will work individually with each student to determine which bathroom and or locker room facility is most appropriate for their gender identification. You mean a biological male may use a girl's washroom, locker room if they feel like it? This is exactly why we presently have biological girls who think they are boys. Going into the boys' washrooms at Menomonie High School. The boys are embarrassed and their complaints to teachers and staff fall on deaf ears. The teachers are being intimidated and gagged by this dangerous and immoral policy. When a school sponsors an activity I'm quoting again, when a school sponsors an activity that requires overnight accommodations, transgender and gender nonconforming students shall not be denied the right to participate. The district shall consider the goals of maximizing a transgender student's social integration and equal opportunity to participate in overnight activities and athletic trips, ensuring the student's safety and comfort and minimizing stigmatization of the student. Accommodations will be made on an individual and as needed basis. Board members, do you want your daughters being forced to room with biological males and think they are girls? This is foolishness. The emperor has no clothes. Ideology trumps safety and common sense. As I said before, the gender policy plan is joined at the hip to this bullying, discrimination, and harassment plan. It essentially gags the peers or educators or counselors who desire to give a word of caution or common sense or a kind, loving warning to gender-confused students who need to be guided back to the moral way. We were made male or female, and no amount of cross-dressing or pretending will change that. Your own conscience bears witness that this is true. Let's go forward, teaching our wonderful children truth.
Thank you, Josie. Next speaker, Andrew Schlu. Andrew will be our final speaker.
My name is Andrew Slew, and I'm the father of an 8-year-old child that was not allowed to go to school for, I don't know the exact time, but most of the time this month, because somebody in his mother's household tested positive, because we all know how accurate those tests are, for COVID and was not sick at all. During that period that he was not allowed to go to school, he cried multiple times because this kid wants to go to school. He cried because he was going to miss the first day, according to him, of science. He was emotional at bedtimes, just randomly thinking of this, because he wants to go to school and learn. This kid loves learning. He's good at math. I suck at math. This kid's going to be teaching me math. And he was not allowed to go to school for non-sick COVID test. On his first day back this Monday, he came out of school in tears because he was harassed about the mask so badly that he does not want to wear. He came back, he wanted to go to school. He does not want to wear the mask. On his first day back at the place he wants to be at, he came out in tears. That is an 8-year-old child. As far as I know, it takes a majority vote to win a vote. And the majority of you are not wearing masks, yet you are voting to force this crap on my son every single day and put him in tears at a place he wants to be at. You are putting your jobs above my son's well-being. As far as I can figure or find out, you're being sued about putting a mask on my son by a family with a lot of influence. You don't want to talk about it? I don't know the details. But this family is allowed to mask their child in school. There's nobody saying you can't. What is compromise? There's a dictionary with a definition in it. It is you're allowed to mask your child and I don't have to. Compromise, everybody wants to speak of compromise that talks about this mask stuff. It's funny because all the people talking about compromise are the ones that are not wanting to compromise. You do what I want or else. You already said that you will not force vax, but we all know how that'll end with masks. So good job on that. So everybody that is fighting this in the school board, thank you. I greatly appreciate anybody that is doing this because I know the pressure that you are coming up against. It is a disgrace sitting up here without a mask, voting to force this on an 8-year-old child. I know that some of you have changed your votes because of this lawsuit. It's disgraceful.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, next item on the agenda, personnel consent agenda. We have nothing under for that for tonight. Move down to action item 3A. Action to approve minutes from September 13th. Is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Carl, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mark? Any discussion? Seeing none, Janet? Motion passes by a vote of 7-0 with 2 abstentions. Moving on to item 3B, action to approve addition to the 2021-2022 staffing plan. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll second.
Chris made the motion, Amy second. Joe.
Yeah, this was laid out well for the board. Thank you to our Director of Student Services, Tony Whiskey. You can see that we've had 6 students with special needs transfer into River Heights Elementary School. 3 students returned from homeschool, 4 in-district transfer students from other elementaries at River Heights, and 7 students from early childhood to River Heights. 2 were anticipated to be in 4K this year, but they did not stay in 4K. There's currently 8 students in the referral process as well. So with the number of students needing specialized services, Mrs. Kwiski is recommending the board approve an additional paraeducator for River Heights Elementary School.
Any questions or discussion from the board? Seeing none, let's vote. Janet? Motion is approved by unanimous vote of 9-0. Action item 3C, action to approve adoption of 2021-2022 budget. Motion to approve.
I'll move to approve.
Charlie, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mark? Joe?
Board members, thanks for all your work throughout the school year, actually throughout the calendar year, reviewing the budget. This is kind of the final step. And, the board reviewed the initial proposal late last winter, approved the preliminary budget at the beginning of the summer, and then reviewed the budget since then. Business manager Leah Theater did a really good job detailing the budget for the board. I guess just a couple things to point out, that the proposed budget of all funds shows a decrease of 17.53%. Much of that has to do with changes related to COVID, and we had such a larger staff last year. Please note that budget to budget, the Fund 10 decrease is 3.83. And then also regular open enrollment is estimated at $8,161, and special needs open enrollment is estimated at $13,013. We'll talk about the tax levy at the next item. Are there any questions about the budget?
Any questions? Okay, seeing none. We have been over this multiple times as Dr. Zagorski said, so at a previous meeting. Janet? Motion passes 8-1 with Clint Moses voting against. Action item 3D, action to approve certification of the 2021-2022 tax levy. Motion to approve.
So move.
Carl? Yep. Second? Chris? We have motion and a second. Dr. Zagorski?
So it's good news on the tax levy. As noticed in the information shared with the board, the levy is down $753,284 compared to last year's levy. The decrease is mostly due to an increase in state aid. As you know, the revenue limit was frozen, so when state aid went up, it's not spendable dollars for the school district, but it is a property tax decrease. The overall property value in the school district rose by 5.32%, and the mill rate will be $7.71. I really like the example that Leah prepared that talks about the example of the impact of the mill rate. If you open that document and look, in 2016, 2017, it was estimated that the average property in Menomonie was valued at $150,000. The mill rate was 9.72, and the school tax, resulting school tax was $1,458. Fast forward 6 years, and with the increase in property valuation over that time of 26.9%, that same property is now worth $190,345. Our mill rate is at $7.71, with resulting tax, school tax of $1,468. So it's $65 less than last year. And if you compare it to 6 years ago, the school taxes on that same property are only $10 more than they were 6 years ago. Now, certainly every property is different, and the property value change is going to impact what the actual tax will be on each property. I know the city of Menomonie did a rebalancing, and there's going to be some properties that are higher, there's going to be some properties that are lower. So this is just for example purposes. But the fact of the matter is that the tax rate in Menomonie is down. School taxes have remained quite stable over the past 6 years, and it's recommended the board approve the tax levy tonight.
Any questions of the board? You know, this is the first time I can remember being on the board that the mill rate's been below $8. I remember when we were working on the referendum, But we were looking at numbers around $10 or slightly higher at that time. But as you said, Joe, rates or property or assessments have gone up 26.9% in the last 6 years. But I'm happy with, the mill rate has gone down and taxes from where they were 6 years ago are relatively the same.
Yeah, it is, it's been over 20 years since the mill rate's been this low.
Any questions of the board? Okay. Dana? Motion passes by a vote of 8-1 with Clint Moses voting against. Item 3E, action to approve 66.0301 Special Education Cooperative Agreement. Is there a motion to approve? Tanya, second.
I'll second it.
Amy? Dr. Zurowski? So we talked about this last meeting.
Yeah, the board sees these from time to time, and what it is we have students who need services for orientation and mobility. We do not have enough need that we would hire our own position for this. So instead, we cooperate with the Eau Claire School District, and we're able to purchase service through them and to provide the service for the student without having to hire a full-time position. So it's recommended that the board approve this contract.
Any questions? Seeing none, let's vote. Janet?
You can come down.
Board docs must be working well tonight because things are flowing through. Sorry. Normally it's, we have a chink in there somewhere. Motion carries by unanimous vote of 9-0. Okay, moving on to the discussion item, our first item, discussion item 4A is on energy plans. We've taken, I think, 3 strikes at this to get it on the agenda, but it's nice to thank us. So, back into those.
Yeah, so this goes back to work the board has done now over really a couple of years. And, at that point, kind of the culmination was hiring our district energy manager, Justin Shinneman. And Justin's here tonight. I appreciate the work that Justin did with Kevin Tomaszewski, our director of building and grounds, and also all the principals and building managers in terms of trying to determine how we could, as a school district, better use our energy, save dollars, and lower our output, I guess, in terms of emissions. So maybe Justin, the board has already seen these plans, and the board has had these plans for over a couple of months now. But maybe if you just want to talk a little bit about what you've seen. I did share with the board the latest update you gave me in terms of energy savings. Maybe to review that for a minute. And then if the board has any questions about the energy plans or comments, tonight would be a great night for that. So go ahead, Justin.
All right, so I'm pulling up the data for the first quarter of the 2021-2022 academic year. And as a whole, the district is down 24-25% over the 4-year average from 2016 to 2019. For these numbers, I excluded 2020 because of the 3-month shutdown, and there was obviously very low use at that point, and it's not a fair comparison to the average. And natural gas similarly is below the average for those same years. It's actually about right on par at this point. It's been lower. Oh, no, that's for the 2020 calendar year. It's on par. I thought it's down about 48% for the first quarter.
And it probably wasn't fair of me to do that to you, Justin, because you don't have the board docs in front of you, but what I was really impressed with is that the reduction of energy compared to the average represents a avoided expense total of approximately $33,700 for the first quarter of the 2021-2022 academic year. And again, that's just great job by our staff, better programming of our HVAC systems, and really just trying to utilize energy the best that we can. So moving to the plans themselves, board members, Justin, could you maybe just talk for a minute about the process you used to develop these plans?
So the first thing I did is I looked for other districts that have done similar things. There was a few districts that through a program called KEEP in the University of Wisconsin had set up some energy policies and plans for their buildings. So try to reference what other schools were doing, taking some data from the organizations on energy, and then sitting down with individual principals to go through, what's important to them for energy management for their building, what do they see, and what should be considered. And putting all that together to make a full district master plan that encompasses all the buildings, and then individual ones that addresses some things that may be different between the buildings and how energy is managed at those individual buildings.
So do board members have any questions for Justin tonight? Before we talk about the solar project?
I guess one of mine is, there's a pretty big number drops for September and first quarter numbers compared to the 4-year average. Does that have to do with the weather? Or is it changes that you made in the building, how the units are run, that kind of thing? Or what's the biggest factor?
I'd say it's a combination of both. Obviously, weather in October here has been rather mild compared to normal. I think September was not too far off of normal temperature-wise. We made changes in scheduling and finding units that were running off schedule that could be addressed. And I think the other thing that's under this year has maybe played a role in some of that. So a combination of weather and changes made and things completed.
I have a question about natural gas that the district uses. Are you looking, is that something the district is able to lock in longer term, or are we going to see some pretty hefty increases in rates?
From what I've seen, we're going to see increases. I know we get it through Excel Energy, like everyone else at their houses and businesses. It's not like propane where we can pre-buy. I know the buildings that use propane, we pre-buy, like Downsville, for instance. Natural gas, from everything I've seen, that's not an option. You get what utility can use you for a rate. So, and they are forecasting increases this year.
I see that. Questions from the board? I guess I have, Amy, go ahead.
I don't have any questions, but I think what you put together is very nice. You did a good job. It's very understandable for somebody that doesn't understand all those things very well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll second that. I'm just gonna do a follow-up question on the question that I asked you last time we were here. But it was just thinking about the high use building, which is the high school, which doesn't seem to have as much kind of proactive ways to attack energy use as maybe like middle school. I was wondering if you just quickly just help me understand a little bit like why that, unless you're gonna do this in the solar discussion, why the high school wasn't attacked, considering it has the most use during the day and during the school year.
Sure. So the first reason we looked at, and I'll preface this with solar is not necessarily known as a energy production source that reduces demand a lot, and it can have some reductions in demand. And the middle school is at that break and rate structure where it's close to where we can incur additional savings if we can get the middle school to the lower rate structure. So my hope was that if we complete an LED project at the middle school sometime in the next year or two and can have that done, coupling that with the solar project can maybe get us underneath that 200 kilowatt demand mark and get us on the small generator rate structure.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Justin? Okay, let's move on to,
First of all, Justin, this is good stuff. Thank you very much. A couple of things for board members to remember as well, that this reduction in the natural gas is during a time when we've increased our ventilation for COVID. So most schools are seeing increases in their natural gas usage, not decreases, because we're ventilating more and we have to heat that ventilated air. So, doubly saving, if you will. And then, of course, you've got the cost, the recoupment charge from Excel that's there as well, thanks to that blip in February that we had last year. And Chris, to some degree, you answered your own question when you mentioned the high school and so many more things going on here during the day. That's one reason why the high school usage is going to be higher per square foot than any other building, because the middle school has a lot of things going on, no doubt, but not the way that the high school does, and the way that it's operating, the way that Justin needs to have the schedules open. So that's part of it, and to some degree, you'll never get the high school down to the level that the middle school is, just because of all those schedules and the things that are going on here in this building versus at the middle school. So
That wasn't my question. Sorry.
So thanks, Justin.
One question I did at Downsville with their heat source system that they have there.
Yep.
Have you had time to play with that yet or no, or still?
The geothermal system, I've gotten into it a little bit, and I guess if it is interest of the board, I have some data as far as how that building performs in comparison to the other buildings. And that one, and I went through and kind of ranked the buildings based on their site use, and taking both the electricity and natural gas and converting them to, it's called a KBTU, which is another unit of energy use that you can use to compare total energy use at a building in. And Downsville does rank #1 in the district for total energy use in the building, but because it's all electric, it costs more, because that same unit of energy in natural gas is less expensive than it is for electric. As far as playing with the system more, I haven't dug in very deep into it. I know more in talking with Bart and Gail and our communications there as far as how it functions. But I haven't, as far as doing increased maintenance on the system or anything like that, I haven't gotten that far in.
There's plenty of time. Any other questions?
Yeah, just briefly, I think I brought this up one other time. I still have a curiosity about air exchanges in our buildings, in the classrooms and the shared spaces. And I don't recall if we had talked about this, but is being able to test any specific room in the district something that could be in the future part of done in-house, or is that something that has to be farmed out to a HVAC company? There's more than just COVID at play, obviously. Clean air is a lot better when there's colds, flus, allergies for everybody. Is that something we can get to where we can measure it here so we know which rooms are slower turning over than others?
Justin, I'll answer that. That's a discussion that we've had, Carl, and Justin actually has we've talked about the need for additional air handling. If that's what we want to do to be able to control each and every room and have that kind of precision. So at this point, yes, we would have to have changes to our system, and we'd have to outsource some of that work for sure. Generally, we have very good airflow, but there's more we can do if that's what we want to do. We would need some different equipment.
Yeah, the question specifically is just measurement, just to know where, each room is at to do an assessment. Not even beyond that, just step one, do we know what we know about airflow?
Can I do that? So some of our rooms are fitted with, it's called a VAB, or variable air volume box, and that measures the CFMs coming out into that room. So some rooms already have equipment that measures it. It's been a while since they've been balanced, so they may have come off calibration a little bit, but they should be relatively accurate. Beyond that, it would require the district getting a piece of equipment that measures the CFMs coming out and measuring the airflow at each, either the return for that room or the supply air ducts, and from there you can figure out air changes.
What do you know the cost for that type of equipment?
A couple $100 for a good one.
I can loan it to you, Justin.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to item D, timelines for the SDMA solar project.
So last year, a company named Eco Group reached out to the board and the administrator, and I was given contact to reach out to him and spoke with him and spoke about the possibility of a solar project at the school district at one of our buildings. Through that communication, kind of went through and picked out, as we spoke earlier, on why we picked the middle school for the site to look at this for, and am in the process of determining the exact size that we're going to go with and confirming that we want to go with the 100 kilowatt size, which will likely be the case, but we just want to confirm that through the use of the E-gauge that will be installed in the coming weeks. After that, we'll get a more accurate budget based on the system size and look for the board to approve the addition of the solar system at the middle school, and then send out an RFP to get a qualified contractor in order to install the system. From there, looking to have it installed sometime next spring, early summer. Yes.
Justin, we talked a little bit about, a possible payback on this. What are your preliminary estimates on that?
Counting in the Focus Energy incentive, they just passed a new incentive last month, that increased it for what they call special sector, which schools are included in that. Counting that in, it's about 12 years, 12, 13 years. We are looking at going after a grant for it, from MREA, which is an organization that is focused on renewable energy. And if we can get that, that can cover up to half of a 100 kilowatt system. So that would obviously significantly reduce the payback period. But without that, considering the Focus Energy incentive, looking at about a 12 to 14 year range.
And what's the lifetime on that system?
25 to 30 years is considered the useful life at that point. They're still producing, it's just at a lower rate than what they're producing when they, at startup. It might be around 75 to 80%.
Do you have any idea where the solar panels would be put?
We're considering a couple different options. One, we're considering rooftop, and then we're also considering the berm on the north side of the middle school. That's a south-facing berm on the far side. As long as there's not issues with utilities underground there, we have to go locate. Looking at that, it should not impede on the use of the rec areas. But that's the two locations we're kind of considering. We did an analysis of shade and for the different areas around the middle school to make sure it was going to be an area that would be suitable.
Would these be systems that move, or would they be solid mount systems?
Solid mount is what we're looking at, just because the O&M costs are considerably less with those.
Any other questions for Justin? Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to our next item. Item C, which is the virtual education report.
So Dave, tonight we have John Sam with us. Mr. Sam is the Director of Academic Services in Menomonie. So not only does he work on strategic planning in terms of before and after school programming for students, but he is also in charge of the virtual school. So tonight, Johnson will give us some virtual school update.
Thank you. I believe you all have a copy of the report that was sent out. A large part of this is looking back at last year and what our virtual usage was there. We did see a large increase in virtual enrollment. So we had a total of 300 students using virtual programming last year. Kind of broken down there, we saw 278 full-time and a couple part-time make up that. That did come with a significant cost that we did see rise quite a bit from the previous years. So that was just under $700,000, came in at $689,000. We did see a large decrease in that coming into this year's numbers. So right now, we are looking at about 80 students for the fall that have enrolled in virtual programming. That is actually the K-12 data. In the past, that was looking at just middle school, high school. Right now, we are looking at having, last year, we did have elementaries as well. We used programming through the Wisconsin Virtual School. However, we used our SDMA teachers so that we still have faculty teaching the classes. This year, we're a little bit different as we do have K-12 data. Our 5K program, our K-5 student, is actually using a pilot program through Wisconsin Virtual School that uses their teachers. So we have a new program with them. So we do have 16 students at the elementary level that have been using programming. They're included in that number of 80. So we are seeing a good success in that. Those students are enjoying that, but still seeing some struggles that typical elementary school students would see. As we look through, number of courses taken last year, we had 2,421 successfully passed. We were just over 17,000. That's about 71% of the pass rate. And as we scroll through there a little bit, you can see that the average grade for all of our students was just above 66%. Right in line with our average full-time students at 65%, so those that were taking all of their courses through the programming. Those students that only chose to take 1 to 2 courses, they might be an AP course, another course that was not offered for them, didn't fit their schedule, or is just something that they found interesting. We do see a large increase. They're receiving about 84% in those grades. So looking forward, that's one thing that we do want to take a look at is how many classes students are taking. We obviously see a success rate as the number of those decrease. That's for various reasons. Some students are just taking things more at an interest level. Some just tend to do better virtually than they do in person. So we see some of that fluctuate based on the student. Price-wise, you see that has pretty much stayed the same throughout the years of Wisconsin Virtual School. The change that I will notice, and I want to point out to you guys, is this year with that pilot program, because we're using their teachers, they will charge $1,600 per semester per pupil. So that's a little bit change from last year where it was $200 for their courses. But again, we had to use our teachers for that program. We continue to find strengths in the Wisconsin Virtual School. It's a self-paced program, so students can log on, work when it is working for them. They might be more active with hours in the morning, the afternoon, where they have some parents around or something that can help them with programming. We continue to have a coach in the high school, and she actually reaches out to our high school and middle school and offers support for those students. She does a wonderful job every Friday, sends out weekly updates to families to make sure kids are on track, kind of gives a gentle nudge if they need a little bit of nudging. She does a very good job with that. And areas for growth, we do want to promote the virtual school a little bit better, continue to grow on that as they get new courses. We want to make sure our students are aware of new courses. One big thing we want to look at is having the tools of success available for those students. Some of our students and families do struggle with using Google Docs. That's one area that we've looked at increasing this year, sending us some information. We found some more areas, some hiccups that they just aren't aware of how to use that program. So we want to make sure they have all those tools for success. And the last page there just gives a little bit of information about the pilot program. Wisconsin Virtual School has done a great job. We meet bi-weekly with their associates coordinator and just have a meeting to see how things are going for the program, how we'd like to improve it. It is something they want to continue. They're looking to add to it. Moving forward, after some more options, they're looking at adding a Spanish course for youth as well. So it has been a successful program. Our students do have live lessons for that, as you can see I laid out there. So they do meet live with the teacher via Zoom. They also have 15 minutes each day to meet with their cohorts. So there's different kids they can log on to and communicate with, as well as an hour in the afternoon that they can log on to a Zoom session if they want, if they just have questions to ask their teachers. Any questions?
I just had one, John. Are the dates for the virtual school, are they worked into the MSHS, the course offerings, so item E that we have? Joe, are those dates like all put together? So I know, because I'm assuming when we talk about offering, we have the concern with Stout and their deadline dates. Like, do we have a place that families have all these dates in order when they go to plan for their academics for the following year? Am I making sense to my question?
Yeah, so is there some sort of master calendar that has all the instructional dates? Maybe Brian, would you know the answer to that, Brian?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's one that's always been a location that has all of those. I know that as far as the early college credit course offering, I know that high school does send out multiple communications for the course of the school year, but I do not know if that is something.
Sure.
And I also know that the virtual school website has a really good website and information with links, including the registration window dates and all that stuff. But in terms of bringing it all together, I'm not sure that we have something that puts it all together.
I just was thinking for families and plans for something, like you were saying, that there's some different classes that aren't offered here or there, that maybe it would hope that they would have them all together when they would go and plan for next school year to know that, oh, I can take career planning, via WBS if I could, so, okay.
And that's something that we can look at combining, as well as, I know the school counselors in the high school do a great job of bringing that up as an option. If there are other courses they want to, they'll suggest that they go on the website and take a look at different course offerings.
Yeah, I got some questions on the bottom of page 1, that table that says course completion data, fall and spring semesters. Those last 3 line items on there, what is average? So what is the 3rd line down in that box, average course grade for all students? That's the total district?
Correct.
Okay. That the 3rd line, average course grade for all students, if you look back to 16-17, we had 84.5%, now we're at 66.85.
Correct.
Okay, and then the 4th one on there, average course grade for full-time students, are those students that are actually in person live, or are these the ones that are taking virtual school?
Those are full-time virtual students.
Okay, so there again, back in 16-17, we had about 82% average grade, and now we're down to 65.9.
Correct.
Last year.
Yeah, Clint, I would attribute that to the pandemic and some people choosing this as a pandemic option, even though it might not be recommended for their child.
And then actually, it looks where they excel, actually, is the last one, average course grade for students taking 1 to 2 courses, that's 1 to 2 virtual courses.
Correct.
So that number is essentially stayed about the same, it's 84.7, 84.36, but you can see even prior to the pandemic, the trend was going backwards before that, the other 2. I agree with you, okay.
Right, and some of that's where we want to continue the conversations of trying 1 or 2 courses before you go full-time virtual, before they see the rigor that does come with taking all those courses. Those numbers will take into account students that might not finish their courses, but those are courses that we as a district paid for. So we look at any student that we paid for a course. So if they decided they didn't complete partway through because it wasn't for them, and stopped working, we still include that number.
Which is why on that same chart, to me, it's surprising how many, we had 2,421 courses taken, and only 1,726 successfully passed. So I would assume there's quite a dropout rate in the first week or 2. I mean, do you have those numbers?
The first week or 2 we don't include in this because we can
Oh,
drop
so that's
students
so
out.
be worse.
So it's like, we talked about this, a lot of students that all of a sudden found out that this wasn't an easy program and this wasn't an easy help for them, they might have thought it was. We still include that data in there. If we would take that data out, we'd see our numbers go up quite a bit.
And even more so than that, what I would say is there were a number of families at the beginning of last year that did not, they were very concerned about sending their child to school. So they signed up for virtual, it wasn't going well, and they asked to have the student come back to school. We did allow those students to come back in person, and we had quite a few of them during the school year last year. And at that point, they weren't progressing, so it didn't show up as a 0 or an F.
Do you know roughly how many would fall in that category? Like a couple hundred?
I don't have that data right in front of me, it's something that I can.
I think that's probably a good guess.
It's probably pretty close to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, kind of a piggyback question. With those same past average course grades in a percentage, can you just, was this middle school and high school in that?
Yes.
Does middle school grade on the percents, are they still on a 1 through 4 or 5? So how do we get a?
Correct, we took their general percentage from their grade. So when we get that from WVS, we give that to the schools, and then they will be able to, they can put them on that grading scale based on the percent.
So WVS is kicking out percents?
Correct.
And we're converting them to our middle school, okay.
And we do have that information of what grade they received in the district.
And then, so I understand, so you're saying if someone did not finish a course, they were in the denominator for this average course grade? So that's not very accurate. So it's better than it looks, is what we're saying, right? Because if we're counting kids who got 0 because they didn't finish, and that's pulling down the average score.
Right.
Amy?
I guess my concern was, about the whole thing is, I heard you say, and maybe I misunderstood, but I heard you say that when some of these students decided that it wasn't for them and you let them back in, that confuses me because I thought once they made up their mind they were going to the Wisconsin virtual school, they stayed there until the end of the semester.
Many of them did finish the semester, but there were also some that just couldn't function in the virtual school. So I know our principals work with a number of families to allow the students back in.
Okay,
This
so.
is last year.
Yeah, I know, I understand last year. So, I'm guessing then that, that since Clint asked for the number of students that did come back, we'll find that information out.
Yeah, we can try to get that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So the data that this is supporting are courses that aren't administered by teachers at Menomonie. So, for example, my daughter took 2 summer courses, and the teacher checked in with her regularly to make sure that she was on course to finish the course in time, as far as time management, things like that. Are teachers from Menomonie involved at all, or is this completely
This is completely
external?
virtual. Yeah, so they have a virtual teacher that does the same, that emails them, checks them in, and makes some progress reports.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. 2021 state assessment.
All right, Brian Saywin, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, will give the board an overview of our most recent state assessment report.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. This evening, as we take a look and have some conversation around our most recent state assessments, a couple of things that I want to point out. The state assessment results that were released last week represent either the forward assessment, the ACT Aspire, the ACT assessment, or the alternate assessment referred to as the dynamic learning maps. That assessment was administered in the spring of 21, so last spring. It was the first state level assessment that was given to students in grades 3 through 11 since before the statewide transition to remote instruction. So we did not have a state level assessment that was given 2 years ago. The most recent one prior to the one given last spring would have been 2 years ago. So for reference, our students who took the ACT last spring are our current seniors and our current 3rd graders. The lowest grade level that took this assessment last spring would be 4th graders this year. So as we take a look at the discussion this evening, just keep that in mind. If I reference our juniors or our sophomores, we'd be talking about those students who have been in that grade level last spring. A couple of points to just kind of share as we go through. Across the state, participation in the state level assessments were down last school year, more so than they were the previous year, from either families who their students weren't in school, they opted out, or they just simply were absent during the window in which the administration of the test took place. We did see a little bit of a decrease in our district in test participation, but not a very large decrease. Generally speaking, we hover right around 98% test participation, and we were just under 95% test participation. And a threshold that is used both in the state and nationally for do you have enough students participate is 95% of your student population. So we were very close to that, we're like 94.9. As far as the state in general saw a dip in overall proficiency levels across the board with all assessments. We did see a slight decrease in some areas, but I would say, generally speaking, our state level assessment last spring was much more stable in relation to where it was in prior years, as opposed to in the state and the region for the most part, there's a noticeable dip in proficiency levels. And I think there are a lot of things that factor into that across the state. So locally, looking at our district, is I really like to take a look at where we are and how do we take our next steps forward. The spring of 2021 represented the highest overall composite score on the ACTs that we had observed on the ACT assessment in 4 years. The previous years. That then also translates to proficiency on that assessment. In Menomonie, our students were more proficient than the state in each of the assessed areas on the ACT last spring, which is something that speaks very highly to that group of students that took that assessment. When we take a look at our state assessment for the elementary grades, the Wisconsin board exam, that's administered in grades 3 through 8. For 10th grade, it also refers to our social studies exam that's given. If you combine all of those grades together, not looking at one in isolation, we are above the state composite in each of those areas when we do that comparison. Again, I think a lot of factors went into that, but it's nice to see that we're making progress in that area, because that historically has not always been the case. And to do that while we're going through a pandemic, I think says a lot to the hard work that our staff and students have been doing as we move forward. Regionally, as I mentioned, there was a general decrease in overall proficiencies. However, our district saw proficiency levels very near what we saw pre-pandemic, which was nice to see. When we take a look at some things that we're currently doing in the district to not only take a look at what we saw last spring, but what we saw in previous state level assessments where we may not have seen proficiency levels that we were hoping to see. Our staff in the district at the high school level have been working on a review of what's referred to as the ACT College and Career Readiness Standards. That work is being done by department, and also is bringing in a series of writing standards that are identified by the assessment, as well as the adopted state standards that we have, and looking at a comparison level of those two, as well as targets that would help to identify marks on the ACT assessment. Within the areas of English language arts and math, we've heard them talk about program reviews at previous meetings, and that is something that is ongoing and underway in our district. And I think it's going to help us identify our next steps in those areas to continue moving forward. For this school year, we did add in some additional math interventions at the elementary level. Our screening assessments that we did during the course of the school year last year showed that we were seeing an overall dip in proficiency or predicted proficiency levels. And in the area of math, that's something that's being observed nationwide. So in addition to the work we were doing last school year, we felt it was important to add those math interventionists at the elementary level, specific to our large elementary schools. And I think that is one thing that's going to help us to continue to address some unfinished learning in the area of math. Traditionally, what we saw, or I shouldn't say traditionally, but generally what we saw is students saw a bigger decrease in their proficiency in the area of math going into last school year. So this is something that is proactive that we're working on. In the area of special education, we have been identified as an LEA in need of assistance year 2. And that is something that we are working with our special education department on, as far as taking a look at ways to improve our inclusionary practices, as well as working with where students spend the majority of their instructional day to make sure that they're spending time with peers when appropriate, as much as possible. Again, some of the data from that identification actually lags several years. So it is possible, when we get that report this year, that we'll see some improvement in that area, but that is something that we've known, that we need to, do some work in, and our staff have been working very hard on that. And what I will say is, when I take a look at our different demographic groups, specific to, our identified populations, our students, within special education are following similar trend lines as our students as a whole. And when we take a look at how our district is doing in relation to other districts with special education, I think we've identified some practices that can help us improve in that area. We've also done that with our students who are identified as being economically disadvantaged, as well as our language learners within our district. And what I can say is I'm not seeing any major red flags coming out or big dips one place or another. I'm seeing a similar trend line as to what we see with our non-identified students, which is obviously we want to try and close that gap, but we're seeing some similar trend lines, which wasn't always the case. So we're seeing some nice growth there as well. And then one of the things that we have also layered in is on a quarterly basis, I'm meeting with our building block principals related to their building student learning objectives or their building goals, so that we can not only check progress toward those identified goals that I shared with the board a few meetings ago, but we can also take a look at the action plans that they've developed and see how they are doing as far as implementing the items that they've identified specific to their buildings. And those conversations are going really well, and our building principals have to be credited with a lot of hard work that they're doing in the building. Again, when we take a look at what we were expecting to see and what we actually saw on the state level assessment, I shared with Joe when we sat down the first time to talk about this. I was happy with what I saw, with what we potentially were expecting to see versus what we actually did see. Our students, as far as being able to have access to consistent in-person instruction last school year, as well as a relatively robust virtual experience, if that is what the families chose. Flexibilities that staff provided for students who were transitioning in and out because of exclusions, and our staff's ability to provide a continuity of instruction to keep them up to date, I think is one of the main reasons, well, several of the main reasons that you didn't observe the dip that some of our regional districts saw and that we're seeing across the state. Moving forward and taking a look at this upcoming school year, I think the work of our program reviews are going to be very important in identifying next steps. The information from this state assessment will feed this, or does feed the school report cards that I will be back probably in 2 meetings to share with you. And we are going to see the hard work that our staff has done showing up on those school report cards, and we can share those publicly as well. Again, this is one assessment in time at that identified level, whereas when you see the school report cards in a few weeks, that will be a rolling average of assessments over multiple years and things like that. One thing that I didn't conclude in the bullet point that I should have is for the first time in several years, when we take a look at our third grade ELA score, if we do isolate third grade in relation to the state, that has been an area where traditionally or historically we have not been above the state comparable for third grade literacy. And on this most recent state assessment, we are above the state at that grade level. The third grade students would be the first group of students that participated in our phonics instruction that we added back in a few years ago. And they were the first group to get that experience as kindergartners, as first graders, and as second graders. And then they took the assessment as third graders. So it will be interesting to see how that cohort of students does over time. It will also be interesting to see how our current third graders, second graders, and first graders do over the next few years. But again, intended to just give a brief snapshot. Again, when we take a look at what we saw in the region, elementary, we probably, when we look at from the ELA standpoint, we still have some work to do. Again, that incoming third grade group had a nice showing in relation to the state, but if we look at third, fourth, and fifth grade, that is in, we have 2 of those 3 grade levels that weren't above the state, but that third grade was. Our middle school literacy, we are above the state and do well regionally. And then as that translates then up to the high school, we had a very nice showing with the ACT. So at this point, I'm happy to answer questions. I could talk this stuff all evening and go down a rabbit hole, but I know that's not necessarily our purpose tonight. But I'm happy to answer any questions or comments.
Questions for Brian?
Yeah, Brian, so just looking at page 2, the ACT composite graph. Just kind of curious where the state ended up. If you kind of look, there's 7 that started on the left, but only 6 that finished on the right. And to my best guess, it's the state or the red one that didn't finish on the right side. Just wondering where that finished up as far as the average.
Yep, so actually, the red line of the state, when you look at that one, it actually goes in with the orange. Give me just one moment, I can tell you what that composite is. I've got that number on another sheet that I have up. We just one moment. All right, so the state was 19.1, which on that graph is going to overlap with one of those other lines where we're 20.10. So we're a full point above the state. Thank you.
Other questions?
Just a curiosity question. Brian, I was looking at the social studies one and you mentioned the average line there. What page is this?
It'd probably be
Page 5.
Yep.
So that's an aggregate of 4, 8, and 10.
Yep.
And that was a little concerning to me that we had actually made a lot of progress, it looks like, 16, 17 to 17, 18, and then had a fairly precipitous drop. Others have dropped too, but I think I'm most concerned that we had made some progress there. So what do we know about social studies?
Sure. So social studies, and I will say science as well, are 2 that are at times challenging to represent graphically, and sometimes I'll go back and forth as to whether or not we should include them. The reality is they are a content area that is vitally important and I think equally deserving of being represented when we have these conversations. But because those assessments are only given in 4th grade, 8th grade, and 10th grade for social studies, even when we combine those, it's 3 groups of students versus a wider range. So if we have one grade level that does not perform as well as the other 2 grade levels, sometimes it will show up, accurate in the report. But what we know about social studies is our sophomore class last year did not do as well as the state, whereas our 3rd and 4th grade classes did as well or better than the state. So when we look at that, this is a graph that will swing a lot more than the math or the ELA. When we take a look at our sophomore class, current junior class as a whole, and we take a look at the other assessments that they took, that cohort of students historically has performed lower on standardized assessments as well as their screening assessments. So I'm not entirely surprised to see that with this aggregate. A year or 2 years ago, we wouldn't have had these 3 cohorts on this graph, so it would look specific to that group as well. So I don't know if I answered your question, Carl, or not, but
Yeah, to some extent, I guess the follow-up or clarifying would be, math, we heard that you hired specialists, math specialists. What do you do to tune up social studies? Do you hire social studies specialists, or is it a curriculum issue, or?
So, social studies assessment actually, has a fairly high reading comprehension component to it, and writing to a lesser degree. So what I will say is our high school social studies department has actually taken it upon their shoulders on a year in, year out basis to take a look at, how do they help support or help, increase overall literacy within their content area. And I would argue they're some of the leaders in our district in doing that, when we look at content area literacy. So, the reality is if students can read and comprehend at a higher level, they will do better on our social studies assessment. It would be nice if we had, a social studies coach, in our district. Sure, it'd be nice if we were able to have a coach, in a lot of areas, like we do in some of the other content areas. But what I will say is, improving overall literacy, transcends many of the content areas. And our social studies department, in addition to doing that, has taken upon themselves to dig into subsets and sub-skills within the social studies, geography, economics, political science areas, to take a look at, are there aspects of their curriculum that we do better with? Actually, we'll be meeting with that department on Wednesday to dig into this most recent assessment to see, do we see something that we didn't see 2 years ago, to dig into that. But by and large, I think they have done a nice job of adjusting their curriculum where it needs to be adjusted, but then getting into the content area literacy is the piece that is helpful there.
Other questions for Brian? Chris?
This on, okay, sorry. Hey, we gotta be pretty pleased about that. Like, whatever we did last year, it seemed like from the outside that it was kind of a cluster. But between the teachers and the administration, we came out considerably ahead of like everybody else. For as much of an unmitigated disaster as last year seemed to have been, like, we did a damn good job. And you can say that all the way through the district, right into the classroom, as this is evidence that we were doing a lot of things right to manage a really difficult situation. So I just was so happy. And I saw some of the outcomes that were coming out of this, especially thinking about how we dealt with a really bad year in ways that seemed to be very, contentious at times, but our students really reaped benefits of that. And if you think especially about the number of the kids that were in that WBS program, which is very concerning that only 66% of the kids passed classes, consider that in the face of like kids that are forced into online learning, my kid included, that struggled with that, they still came out and did really well. So there's a lot of things that I see that I can take out of this that I was pretty pleased about. One thing I would like to think about is I was trying to get my head around what you were saying. I think you said that there was a cohort of students that had some phonics-based instruction in K1, 2, and now they're in the 3rd grade. Is that right?
They're actually currently in the 4th grade, Chris. They were 3rd graders last year, so they took this state assessment last spring. So our current 4th grade students.
Yeah, so is that the class that did pretty well?
Yes, that's the class that came out ahead of.
Right. So I was like, oh, okay, that blends with a lot of things we're hearing, from folks in the other districts about things maybe we can do to address things, and that seems like a successful outcome, and we should monitor that. And hopefully that's something we can learn from going forward, because then there's a dip going down the other side. And thinking about how we sustain some of those learning practices might be really interesting as well. And the last thing I was thinking about, when Carl was talking about some of the dip in the social studies testing, and you make a really great argument that that's just a tranche of students. It's not like it's a good wide selection of our kids, but were we really building and I'm probably going to get the nomenclature wrong, but were we really building like a certificate type program and like global studies or?
So Global Scholar, and
yeah,
it's actually spearheaded out of our world language department.
Yeah, and we were getting some traction there, and that would be something that could really help out some of those, putting social studies in a map, and for the types of kind of critical analysis and the reading skills that you get out of there.
Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to item 4E, MHS course offering timeline for 2022, 2023.
So this kind of alludes to the question Tanya asked earlier in terms of what kind of timeline do we have, and how do we communicate things out? And I think the suggestion of perhaps calendaring one large calendar could be included. And I appreciate the work, Brian, we've worked on this over the years, and this is a very similar timeline that the board has seen in the past. I know we did have some discussion last year.
Like what months do they have?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pull up the date.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I know where to find it, but I don't know it off the top of my head. So we can make sure that that gets included as well.
Okay, any other questions from board members?
I would just second what Tanya said. I think a one-stop shop for, let's make it as easy as possible for families to have one place to look for all the ways of learning that we offer.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be a little easier moving forward too. We kind of had to, I don't know how Chris described it, we kind of had to throw things together in terms of the virtual school options related to the pandemic. But I think that's a good suggestion that, especially as we get to a more normal schedule, to have one calendar that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we'll move on. Thank you, Brian. Move on to item F, review extracurricular staff contract requests. Any questions on those? Okay. Item G, review items related to next meeting dates, board committees and reports. So we have 2 meetings scheduled in November, the 8th and the 22nd. We have right now on board docs or here scheduled for AFC, but I think with the crowd, I counted 24, which would probably fill that room up pretty good. So unless you have other thoughts.
Whatever the pleasure of the board is.
Yeah. Board members, anything? You want to continue to hold the meetings here, or do you want to switch back to the SC?
Is this the best room here as in the, all be better for a medium-sized crowd? Or are there more logistical issues there?
It is really difficult with the front of that room being so small to have, there's really not enough room to put tables up there for the board to face the crowd, unless you're sitting at that first row. I would suggest here, if it would be in high school. And perhaps, Dave would want to look at the agenda and, depending, what we find out about potential vaccine options for kids who might want it. We might have a larger crowd if we're anticipating that, maybe being here.
I think for right now, we'll plan on being here again unless something changes. Okay, move down to our tabled items. Any action requested on any of those items? Okay, if not, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So, second.
Chris made the motion, Mark second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Please stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.